The conference room aboard the human ship felt too small for the nervous energy filling it. Minho adjusted his formal uniform for the third time, watching as Ambassador Taijin reviewed the briefing materials one last time. Through the viewport, the massive Thyran flagship waited like a sleeping dragon, all sharp angles and dark metal plating. "Remember," Taijin said, his voice tight with tension, "the Thyrans value strength and directness. No apologizing, no excessive politeness. They see it as weakness." Minho nodded, though his hands were sweating. He was only here because their original xenobiologist had fallen ill 2 days ago. 28 years old, barely 3 years out of university, and he was about to meet an alien queen who commanded a fleet that could vaporize their colony ship without effort. The Thyran escort shuttle arrived exactly on schedule. Everything about the Thyrans was precise, Minho had learned. They were a species built on order, hierarchy, and military discipline. As the human delegation crossed into the shuttle, Minho noticed how the Thyran soldiers watched them with unblinking reptilian eyes, their scaled hands never far from their weapons. The flagship's interior was even more intimidating than its exterior. The corridors stretched impossibly high, designed for beings much larger than humans. The Thyrans averaged 7 feet tall, with scaled skin that ranged from deep emerald to midnight blue. Their faces were angular and sharp, with ridge patterns that denoted family lines and social status. They were led to the throne room through a series of increasingly grand halls. Minho tried to memorize everything, noting the temperature, the lighting, the scents. That was his job, after all, understanding alien biology and behavior. He just wished his first real assignment wasn't quite so high stakes. The throne room doors opened with a deep grinding sound, revealing a space that took Minho's breath away. The ceiling soared 50 feet overhead, supported by pillars carved to look like intertwined serpents. Hundreds of Thyran nobles lined both sides of the hall, their formal armor gleaming under lights that mimicked their home sun. And at the far end, on a throne that seemed carved from a single piece of black stone, sat Queen Vela. She was younger than Minho expected, perhaps equivalent to a human in her early 30s. Her scales were a deep purple blue, and the ridge patterns on her face were inlaid with silver, marking her royal bloodline. She wore armor despite being. In her own throne room, a breastplate of dark metal with the imperial seal prominent on her chest. But what caught Minho's attention was the small bundle she held in her arms. The infant prince, heir to the Thyran Empire, was crying. Not a soft whimper, but a full-throated wail that echoed off the high walls. The human delegation approached. The throne as rehearsed, stopping at the appropriate distance. Taijin began the formal greeting they had practiced for weeks. Queen Vela responded in heavily accented but perfect English, her voice strong and commanding, even as she shifted the crying baby in her arms. The baby's wails grew louder. Several of the Thyran nobles shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. Minho found himself watching the infant more than the diplomatic proceedings. Something about the cry bothered him. It didn't sound like simple fussiness or hunger. It sounded like pain. The negotiations began poorly and got worse. When Taijin mentioned humanity's interest in establishing a trade route through Thyran space, the Queen's chief advisor, a massive Thyran named Thyran, responded with barely concealed hostility. When the human delegation presented their gifts, traditional Earth items meant to show cultural exchange, several nobles openly scoffed. "You offer us trinkets," Thyran said, his voice like grinding stones, "when you want access to roots our ancestors died to secure?" Taijin tried to recover, but he was sweating now, his rehearsed responses faltering. The baby's cries were constant now, a soundtrack to the deteriorating negotiations. Queen Vela's patience was clearly wearing thin. Her jaw clenched as she attempted to soothe her son while managing the diplomatic disaster unfolding before her. Then Taijin made his fatal mistake. Trying to appeal to Thyran values, he said something about how humans understood the importance of strength and military power. But he used the wrong word, a term that in Thyran culture implied conquest and domination rather than honorable defense. The throne room erupted in angry hisses and growls. Queen Vela stood abruptly, the baby still wailing in her arms. The room fell silent except for the infant's cries. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You come to our space, knowing nothing of our ways, speaking words you do not understand. You offer us nothing of value and ask for everything. Why should we not simply escort you to the border and forbid your return?" Taijin opened his mouth, but no words came out. The other human diplomats looked equally stricken. Minho felt his heart pounding. 3 months of travel to reach Thyran space. Humanity's first real chance at a powerful ally in this region of the galaxy. And it was falling apart. "You have 1 cycle," Queen Vela continued, her eyes cold. 30 of your hours. Prove to me that humanity is worth the effort of an alliance. Otherwise, leave our space and do not return." She turned to leave, but the baby's cries reached a new pitch of distress. The queen stopped, her shoulders tight with frustration. And in that moment, Minho's training took over. He had spent 3 years studying xenobiology, specializing in cross-species pediatrics. He had written papers on universal mammalian distress signals. And every instinct he had was screaming that this baby wasn't just upset. Something was wrong. He stepped forward before he could think about it. The Thyran guards immediately moved to block him, their weapons humming to life. The entire delegation gasped. Taijin grabbed for his arm, missing by inches. "Your Majesty," Minho said, his voice somehow steady despite his terror. "Please, I think I can help." The throne room was deathly quiet. Queen Vela slowly turned, her eyes narrowing as she looked at him. For a long moment, she said nothing. Minho could feel everyone staring at him. He had just violated about a dozen protocols and possibly insulted an alien queen in front of her entire court. Then, to everyone's shock, Queen Vela spoke. "Approach." The guards parted reluctantly. Minho walked forward on shaking legs, very aware that he was probably ending his diplomatic career and possibly his life. He stopped a respectful distance from the throne and met the queen's eyes. "You believe you can calm the air when our own physicians cannot?" she asked, her tone impossible to read. "I'd like to try," Minho said, "with your permission." Queen Vela studied him for another long moment. The baby continued to cry, the sound pulling at something deep in Minho's chest. Finally, the queen nodded once and descended from her throne. Up close, she was even more imposing, towering over him. She held out the crying infant, and Minho carefully took the small Thyran prince into his arms. The baby was heavier than a human infant, his scales still soft and flexible with youth. And as Minho had suspected, the moment he gently pressed on the infant's abdomen in a specific way, adjusting how he held him, the crying began to ease. It was a simple digestive issue, gas trapped in a way that caused pain, common in dozens of species, including humans. Minho had seen it hundreds of times in his studies. He held the baby carefully, supporting his head, applying gentle pressure to help move the gas. And within 3 minutes, Prince Keller stopped crying completely. The silence in the throne room was absolute. Minho looked up to find Queen Vela staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Around them, the Thyran court was frozen in shock. Even Thyran, the hostile advisor, seemed at a loss for words. "How?" Queen Vela said softly. "Did you do that?" Before Minho could answer, the baby let out a small, contented coo and fell asleep in his arms. And Queen Vela, young queen of the Thyran Empire, made a decision that would change everything. "By the old codes," she announced, her voice ringing through the hall. He who calms the air when none other can has proven himself worthy of the royal bloodline. She turned to face her court, her expression fierce. Human Minho, you will become my consort. You will be second father to the heir. This is my decree. Minho stood frozen, a sleeping alien baby in his arms, certain he had just misheard or mistranslated something. Behind him, he could hear Taijin making a choking sound. The Thyron court exploded into shocked voices, some angry, some confused, all loud. And Queen Vela just stood there, looking as surprised by her own words as everyone else. But her jaw was set in determination. What had she just done? What had he just agreed to simply by holding this baby? The diplomatic mission had definitely not gone according to plan. The guest quarters they gave Minho were designed for Thuran nobility, which meant everything was slightly too large and uncomfortably cold. He sat on the edge of a bed that could fit 3 humans and stared at his hands, still feeling the weight of the alien baby he had held hours ago. A baby whose mother had just declared Minho would marry her. The door opened without warning. Yoonji rushed in, her tablet clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with panic and excitement. She was the expedition's xenanthropologist, one of the few people Minho actually knew well from the journey. Do you have any idea what you've done? She said, not bothering with a greeting. Held a baby? Minho offered weakly. You triggered an ancient Thyron law. Yoonji sat down next to him, her fingers flying across her tablet. I've been researching for the past 4 hours. The code Queen Vela invoked dates back almost 1,000 years. It's from a time when Thyron politics were even more violent than now. If someone could calm the royal heir when no one else could, it was seen as a sign from their gods that this person was meant to protect and raise the child. Minho felt his stomach drop. So she wasn't joking. Queens don't joke in front of their entire court, Yoonji said. Especially not Theron queens. They're serious about everything. She pulled up an image on her tablet, showing ancient Thyron text. The exact translation is complicated, but basically, you calm the heir. In front of witnesses. Using methods none of them understood. By their old laws, that makes you qualified to be royal consort. I just recognized a digestive problem, Minho said. Any pediatric specialist could have done the same thing. But they didn't have pediatric specialists, Yoonji said. The Thyrons develop differently than humans. Their infants are usually much hardier. They don't have the same kind of colic or gas issues we do. What you recognized as a common problem is apparently rare for them. A knock at the door interrupted them. 3 Thyron guards entered without waiting for permission, followed by Thyron, the Queen's chief advisor. His scaled face was set in an expression of deep disapproval. The human Minho will come with us, Thyron said. The Queen wishes to speak with you alone. Yoonji gave Minho a worried look, but there was nothing to do except obey. He followed the guards through the vast corridors of the Thyron flagship, trying to memorize the route and failing. They walked for what felt like miles before stopping at a door that looked less formal than the throne room. Inside was what Minho guessed was the Queen's private office. The room was smaller, more comfortable, with star maps on the walls and a desk covered in what looked like reports. Queen Vela stood by a viewport, looking out at the stars. She had removed her formal armor and wore simpler clothing, though she still looked every inch a ruler. Leave us, she said to the guards. Thyron looked like he wanted to argue, but knew better. The door closed, and Minho was alone with an alien queen who had just declared she would marry him. Sit, Vela said, gesturing to a chair. Minho sat, watching as she paced the room. For several long moments, she said nothing, just moved back and forth like a caged predator. Finally, she stopped and looked at him. I made a mistake, she said. Minho blinked. Your Majesty? When I invoked the old code. Vela's hands clenched into fists. I was exhausted. frustrated. My son has been crying for 3 days straight. Our physicians could find nothing wrong. I have been awake for most of that time, running an empire, negotiating with potential allies and enemies, all while my child screamed in pain. She looked away. When you calmed him so easily, I acted on impulse. So we can just forget it happened, Minho said, relief flooding through him. No, Vela said sharply. We cannot. I spoke the words in front of the entire court. To take them back now would show weakness. It would invite challenge to my throne. The noble houses would see me as someone who makes declarations she does not honor. But I'm human, Minho said. Surely there's some exception. There is not. Vela resumed pacing. I checked. I had my scholars check. The old code does not specify species. It only speaks of one who can calm the air. She stopped and looked at him directly. You have 1 cycle to decide. If you refuse the engagement, I will honor that choice. But it will damage relations between our peoples. The court will see it as an insult. The humans who could not negotiate properly and then rejected a royal honor. Minho felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. And if I accept, then you will be bound to me by law, Vela said. You will live here, on the flagship, or on our homeworld. You will help raise my son. You will be expected to learn our ways, our language, our customs. You will attend court functions and state dinners and military ceremonies. She paused. And eventually, we would be expected to marry in full ceremony. This is insane, Minho said quietly. Yes, Vela agreed. But here we are. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Minho asked, What do you want me to do? Vela looked surprised by the question. What do you mean? You're the queen, Minho said. You made this choice, mistake or not. What outcome do you actually want? For the first time, Vela's formal composure cracked slightly. She sank into the chair behind her desk, suddenly looking very tired. I want my son to stop crying. I want 1 night of sleep. I want the noble houses to stop circling like predators, looking for any weakness to exploit. She met his eyes. I want someone I can trust in a court full of people who would replace me the moment I falter. And you think I could be that person? Minho asked. You don't even know me. I know you risked insulting me and possibly your life to help my child, Vela said. I know you succeeded where my own people failed. And I know. She hesitated. I know that you are not part of the existing power structure. You have no house loyalty, no political debts, no secret agenda for the throne. I'm also completely unqualified to be royal consort to an alien empire, Minho pointed out. Perhaps, Vela said, you have 30 hours to decide. If you accept, I will give you instructors, advisors, whatever you need. And she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I will give you an escape clause. 1 year. If after 1 year you truly cannot adapt, or if you find the position intolerable, I will find a way to end the engagement that saves face for both our peoples. You can do that? Minho asked. I am the queen, Vela said with a slight smile. I can do many things when properly motivated. A soft sound came from a door Minho hadn't noticed before. A moment later, a Thyran servant entered carrying Prince Keller. The baby was awake and starting to fuss again. The servant looked apologetic. Forgive me, Your Majesty, but the prince refuses his feeding. Vela stood, reaching for her son, but Keller's fussing increased. Then the baby's eyes found Minho across the room, and the crying stopped. The infant made a soft cooing sound, reaching tiny clawed hands in Minho's direction. The servant looked shocked. Viola looked resigned. And Minho felt his decision crystallizing, even as he knew it was probably the craziest choice he would ever make. May I? He asked, standing. Vela nodded, and Minho crossed to take the baby. The moment he held Keller, supporting his head and body the way he had learned during his xenobiology training. The infant settled completely. Those large, intelligent eyes looked up at him with what might have been trust or might have been simple infant contentment. "He knows you," Vela said softly. "In less than an hour, my son has bonded with you more than anyone except me." Minho looked down at the baby in his arms, then up at the queen, who had turned his life upside down with a single impulsive declaration. He thought about his team on the human ship, probably panicking. He thought about the diplomatic mission that had failed so spectacularly. He thought about the fact that his choice would affect not just him but the entire relationship between humanity and the Thyran Empire. Then he thought about the simple fact that this baby needed someone who understood his needs. And this queen needed someone she could trust. And maybe, just maybe, he could actually help. "I'll do it," Minho said. "The engagement. 1 year, with your escape clause. I'll try to be whatever you need me to be." Vela's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Minho to identify. Finally, she nodded formally. "Then it is decided. Welcome to the royal house, Consort-elect Minho." "I'm going to need a lot of help," Minho said, still holding the now sleeping baby. "You will have it," Vela promised. "And Minho? Thank you." For trying to help her son, she meant. For accepting an impossible situation. For not making this harder than it already was. Minho just nodded, wondering what exactly he had just agreed to. In the guest quarters, Yunji was probably having a breakdown. On the human ship, Ambassador Taijin was likely trying to figure out if this was a diplomatic victory or disaster. And somewhere in the Thyran court, noble houses were already planning how to use this situation to their advantage. But in this quiet office, holding an alien baby who had somehow decided to trust him, Minho felt oddly calm. He had made his choice. Now he would have to live with it. "I should probably tell my people," he said. "Tomorrow?" Vela said. "Tonight, stay here. Help me with Keller. We can face the political nightmare in the morning." And so Minho spent his first night as consort-elect to an alien queen, learning how to prepare Thyran infant formula and change alien diapers. While the queen of a military empire took her first full night of sleep in 3 days. It was, he reflected, moving into the royal quarters of a Thyran flagship was nothing like Minho had imagined. Not that he had much time to imagine anything. Within hours of his acceptance, servants began moving his belongings from the guest quarters, while instructors appeared with tablets full of information he needed to memorize immediately. The first instructor was a stern female Thyran named Kira, who taught him basic court etiquette. She spent 3 hours explaining the 17 different types of bows required for different ranks of nobility, the proper way to address military officers versus civilian advisors, and which colors he was absolutely forbidden to wear because they were reserved for the royal bloodline. "You will make mistakes," Kira said, her tone suggesting she expected many mistakes. "Try not to make them in front of the entire court." The language instructor was worse. Thyran had sounds that human vocal cords simply could not produce properly, which meant Minho's accent would always mark him as an outsider. He struggled through basic phrases, his tongue tripping over syllables that required a forked tongue to pronounce correctly. "You sound like a hatchling," the instructor said, not unkindly. "But you will improve, eventually." Through it all, baby Keller became Minho's anchor to sanity. Every few hours, a servant would bring the prince to him, and Minho would take a break from lessons to feed or change, or simply hold the infant. It was the only time he felt competent, using skills he actually possessed rather than trying to learn an entire alien culture in a few days. On the third day, Vela summoned him to her private dining room for what she called an informal meal. Minho learned quickly that Thyran and human definitions of informal were very different. The dining room was larger than his apartment back on Earth, with a table that could seat 20. Vela sat at one end in casual armor, reviewing reports while servants brought in dishes. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the seat nearest her. "You have been avoiding me." "I've been busy," Minho said, which was true. Between lessons and caring for Keller, he barely had time to sleep. "Too busy to speak with your future wife." Vela's tone was unreadable. Minho sat down carefully, eyeing the Thyran food being placed before him. Some of it looked edible by human standards. Some of it looked like it might eat him first. "I thought you might want space. This can't be easy for you either." Vela actually smiled slightly at that. "My advisors are calling it the worst political decision I have made as queen. Several noble houses have filed formal complaints. The military council is concerned about the precedent. And half the court thinks you have somehow bewitched me." "Have I?" Minho asked, trying to lighten the mood. "If you have, you are terrible at it," Vela said. "A proper enchanter would at least teach me better sleep habits." She pushed aside her reports. "How are the lessons going?" "I'm learning that I'm incompetent at almost everything your culture values," Minho said honestly. "You are learning," Vela corrected. "That is different. My chief advisor Thyran believes you will fail the trials when the council demands them. He gives you 3 weeks before you request release from the engagement." "Trials?" Minho asked, alarm rising. Vela's expression grew more serious. "The High Council has formally challenged your right to the engagement. They are invoking their authority to test your worthiness. 3 trials in the traditional manner: wisdom, strength, and heart." Minho felt his appetite disappear. "When?" 2 weeks from today," Vela said. "I am sorry. I tried to delay it, but the council is within their rights." She met his eyes. "You can refuse. Accept the release from engagement now, before the trials. No one would blame you. Would it hurt your position?" Minho asked. "Yes," Vela admitted. "But I will survive. I have survived worse." Minho thought about it for a moment. He thought about baby Keller, who smiled now when he saw Minho coming. He thought about the human delegation still camped on their ship, waiting to see if this insane situation would turn into an actual alliance. He thought about Vela, who had been honest with him, even when honesty made her look weak. "Tell me about the trials," he said. Relief flashed across Vela's face before she hit it. "The trial of wisdom is a strategic test. You will be given an ancient puzzle that has been used to test Thyran leaders for centuries. You must solve it before the sun sets, and if I fail, the engagement ends," Vela said simply. "The trial of strength is a hunt. You will be taken to a preserve and must survive against a predator from our homeworld. You do not have to kill it, but you must prove you can face danger without cowardice." "And the trial of heart?" Minho asked, dreading the answer. "You must demonstrate that you understand and respect Thyran values," Vela said. "Usually through a speech before the full council. It is the most subjective trial, and therefore the most dangerous. Personal bias can override any argument you make." They ate in silence for a while. The food was actually decent once Minho figured out which dishes were meant to be eaten hot versus cold. Finally, he asked the question that had been bothering him since he accepted the engagement. "Why did you really invoke that old law?" he asked. The truth, not the political answer. Vela was quiet for so long that Minho thought she would not answer. Then she set down her utensils and looked at him directly. "I became queen when I was 23, she said. "My parents were killed in a border war with the Krathos sector. I had 1 year of preparation before I had to take the throne. 1 year to learn what should take a lifetime." She paused. "Everyone around me has an agenda. Every advisor, every noble, every military officer. They all want something, and they all believe they know better than me how to rule." "That sounds lonely," Minho said quietly. "It is," Vela admitted. And then Keller was born, and I realized I had to do this for decades more. Raise an heir while managing an empire. Make decisions that affect billions while getting 3 hours of sleep. And when you calmed my son so easily, when you did something none of my people could do. She trailed off. You saw a way out? Minho guessed. I saw someone who might actually help, Vela said, without wanting power or position or political favor. Someone who risked everything just to stop a baby's pain. She met his eyes. I was wrong to trap you with my impulsive words. But I was not wrong about you. Before Minho could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Vela was on her feet instantly, her hand going to a weapon Minho had not even noticed she was carrying. Thyran guards burst into the room, shouting in their own language. Your Majesty, there has been an attack, one of them said in English for Minho's benefit. The nursery. Vela was running before the guard finished speaking. Minho followed, his heart pounding. They raced through corridors, more guards joining them until they reached the royal nursery. The doors were damaged, scored with weapon fire. Inside, 2 guards lay unconscious, and the nursery staff were backed into a corner, terrified. But Keller was safe, held protectively by his primary caretaker, an elderly Thyran named Suri who looked shaken but unharmed. What happened? Vela demanded, taking her son and checking him for injuries. Assassins, Your Majesty, Suri said, her voice trembling. 2 of them, masked and armed. They disabled the guards and came for the prince. But they fled when the alarms triggered. Did they harm him? Vela asked urgently. No, Suri said. They seemed surprised to find me here. I was not on the scheduled rotation. They hesitated, and that gave me time to trigger the alert. Thyran arrived with more guards, his expression grim. We are searching the ship. They cannot have gone far. Which house? Vela asked coldly. We do not know yet, Thyran said. But Your Majesty, I must speak plainly. This attack came shortly after the announcement of the humans' engagement. Some are saying, some are always saying something. Vela cut him off. Find the attackers. Question them. And increase security on the nursery immediately. As orders were given and guards dispersed, Minho stood to the side, feeling useless. He was not a warrior. He had no weapons training. He could not protect anyone from assassins. All he could do was watch as Vela comforted her son and Thyran organized a manhunt. But later that night, when Vela finally returned to her quarters with a sleeping Keller, she found Minho waiting. He had convinced the guards to let him stay, arguing that the baby might wake and need him. You should not be here, Vela said, exhaustion clear in every line of her body. It is not safe. Neither is the nursery, apparently, Minho said. Let me help, please. Vela looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded and placed Keller in the portable sleeping pod nearby. She sank into a chair, and for the first time, Minho saw her as she really was. Not a queen or a military leader, but a young mother terrified for her child's safety. They will try again, she said quietly. Whoever did this, they will try again. Then we prepare, Minho said. We adapt. We protect them together. You are not a soldier, Vela said. No, Minho agreed. But I am someone who cares about that baby. And I am someone who does not want to see you face this alone. Vela looked at him, really looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. Not love, not yet. But perhaps the beginning of real trust. The kind of trust that could not be bought with political promises or military alliances. The kind that came from Simp. The trial of wisdom took place in the ancient council chamber, a room that had witnessed 1,000 years of Thyran decision-making. Minho stood before a massive stone table engraved with a complex pattern of interconnected symbols. Around the room, the High Council watched from elevated seats, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. "You have until sunset," announced Council Elder Varath, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The puzzle before you has been solved by every great tyrant leader in history. Solve it or prove yourself unworthy of the royal house." Minho studied the table. The symbols represented military units, resources, territories, and what looked like enemy positions. It was a strategic problem, he realized. A war game of sorts. The goal was not immediately obvious, but the pattern suggested multiple possible solutions, each with different costs and benefits. The Thyran approach would be direct, he thought. Overwhelming force applied to the weakest point. But as he traced the patterns with his fingers, he noticed something the Thyrans might have missed. The puzzle was not about winning a battle. It was about winning a war while preserving your own forces. Hours passed. The sunlight streaming through the high windows moved across the floor, marking time. Minho tried 3 different solutions, each one failing some hidden test built into the puzzle's design. The council members whispered among themselves, and Minho caught words that probably translated to failure and weakness. Then, with less than an hour before sunset, Minho stopped thinking like he was supposed to solve a Thuran puzzle. Instead, he thought like a human. Humans were not the strongest species or the most numerous. Humanity survived by being clever, by finding solutions others overlooked, by cooperating in unexpected ways. He rearranged the symbols into a pattern that no previous solver had attempted. Instead of crushing the enemy forces, he divided his own forces to create a defensive network. Instead of taking territories, he controlled supply lines. Instead of decisive battle, he created a situation where the enemy could not advance without destroying themselves through attrition. When he placed the final symbol, the entire table glowed with soft blue light. The council chamber fell silent. Elder Varath descended from his seat to examine the solution. His expression was unreadable. "Explain your reasoning," he commanded. "The goal is not to win quickly," Minho said, his voice steadier than he felt. "The goal is to win sustainably. This formation lets you defend with minimal losses while forcing the enemy to exhaust themselves. Eventually, they will have to negotiate or retreat. You achieve victory without sacrificing your own people." "A coward's strategy," Thyran said from his council seat. "We do not hide behind defenses." "It is not hiding," Minho countered. "It is smart warfare. Winning a battle but losing half your forces is not really winning. It is just mutual destruction." Varath studied the glowing table for a long moment. Then he looked at Minho with what might have been respect. "In 1,000 years, no one has solved the puzzle this way. The pattern you created, it is not traditional, but it is not wrong." He paused. The trial of wisdom is past. Relief flooded through Minho, but he had no time to celebrate. The trial of strength was scheduled for the next morning. The hunting preserve was located on one of the Thyran flagship's auxiliary vessels, an entire ship dedicated to maintaining environments from various Thyran worlds. Minho stood at the entrance to a dense forest that looked nothing like Earth forests. The trees were tall and dark, with black bark and leaves that shimmered with an oily iridescence. The air smelled of sulfur and something sharp that made his nose itch. "Inside is a Krather beast," Vela explained. She had insisted on accompanying him to the trial, despite Thyran's objections. "It is a predator from our homeworld, intelligent enough to hunt strategically, but not sapient. You must survive in its territory for 6 hours. You do not need to kill it, but you cannot simply hide or run." "What do you mean, run?" Minho asked. "The trial requires that you face the beast," Vela said. "Confront it in some meaningful way. Prove you have courage." Minho looked at the weapons rack provided for trial participants. Blades, spears, energy weapons. He had exactly 3 days of basic weapons training, which qualified him to maybe not stab himself by accident. Taking a weapon he barely knew how to use seemed like a good way to get killed faster. "Can I bring other equipment?" he asked. "Not weapons?" Vela looked surprised. "What kind of equipment? Medical supplies, scanning device, maybe some rope?" Thyron, observing from nearby, snorted. "The human wants to bring healing supplies to a fight. This will be a short trial." But Vela nodded. "It is not forbidden. Bring what you need." Minho entered the preserve with a pack full of items that made the Thyron observers shake their heads in disbelief. No weapons except a small knife meant for cutting rope or cloth. Instead, he carried a portable medical scanner he had borrowed from the ship's xenobiology lab. Several doses of fast-acting tranquilizer he had prepared himself, a thermal blanket, and various other items that probably looked ridiculous to warrior culture like the Thyrans. The forest was quiet in a way that set Minho's nerves on edge. He walked carefully, scanning his surroundings with the device. The Krather beast was out there somewhere, and if it was anything like the predators he had studied, it was probably already tracking him. He found tracks within the first hour. Large, clawed prints in the dark soil. The beast was massive, probably 3 times his weight. His scanning device picked up thermal signatures that suggested it was warm-blooded and recently fed, which might mean it was not immediately hungry. Minho did not run. Running would trigger chase instinct in most predators. Instead, he moved deliberately, making himself visible, letting the beast know he was there. He climbed onto a fallen log and stood in a clear space, waiting. The Krather emerged from the trees like a nightmare made flesh. It stood on 4 powerful legs, with a body covered in armored scales. Its head was broad and flat, with multiple eyes and a mouth full of serrated teeth. It made a sound like grinding stone and advancing. Minho stood his ground, his heart hammering. He held up his scanner, letting the device's light and sound make him seem strange, not prey-like. The beast paused, confused by his behavior. Then Minho did something no Thyran warrior would consider. He carefully unwrapped food from his pack. Not human food, but meat he had specifically requested from the Thyran kitchens. He placed it on the ground and backed away slowly. The Krather approached the food cautiously, sniffed it, then devoured it in seconds. It looked at Minho with what might have been curiosity. He placed more food, creating a trail that led the beast away from him, but kept it engaged. For 6 hours, Minho did not fight the Krather. Instead, he studied it. He observed its behavior, used his scanner to check its health, and discovered something interesting. The beast had an infected wound on its rear leg, likely from a previous trial participant's weapon. That was why it was so aggressive. Using his medical supplies and a lot of careful patience, Minho managed to treat the wound while the beast was distracted by food. The tranquilizer helped, applied carefully to the food in measured doses that would not harm the creature, but would make it sleepy and calm. By the time the 6 hours ended, the Krather beast was sleeping peacefully, its wound cleaned and bandaged, while Minho sat nearby, watching the sun set through the alien trees. The trial observers found him there, alive and uninjured. The Krather was also alive and uninjured, which apparently had never happened before in the history of the trial. "You did not fight it," Thyron said, his tone making it clear he saw this as failure. "I did not need to fight it," Minho said. "It was not evil or malicious. It was just an animal in pain, acting on instinct. Killing it would have been pointless cruelty." Elder Vorath examined the sleeping beast and its bandaged leg. "Explain what you did." Minho explained his observations, his treatment plan, his use of xenobiology knowledge instead of weapons. The council members listened with expressions that ranged from confusion to grudging admiration. "This is not how the trial is traditionally completed," Varth said slowly. But the requirement was to face the beast and prove courage, Mela interjected. Minho did face it. He stood his ground when it approached. He did not run or hide. He simply chose a different kind of confrontation. After a long deliberation, Varth nodded. The trial of strength is passed. Through unorthodox means, but passed nonetheless. 2 trials done. 1 remaining. And that night, as Minho returned to the royal quarters exhausted and still shaking with adrenaline, he found Unji waiting with news that drained the last of his energy. "I need to tell you something," she said, her expression grim. "About Ambassador Taijin and the Earth government." What she showed him on her tablet made Minho's blood run cold. Communications between Taijin and Earth's military intelligence. Plans to use Minho's position to gather information on Thyran military capabilities. Discussions about how the engagement could be leveraged for strategic advantage. "They are using you," Yunji said quietly. "Using this whole situation as an intelligence opportunity." Minho felt sick. His own people, his own government, had turned his bizarre situation into a spy operation. Without his knowledge or consent. "Does Vela know?" he asked. "Not yet," Yunji said. "But the Thyrans will find out eventually. They are very good at eye." Silence in the council chamber was absolute. Every eye was fixed on Minho as he revealed the truth about Earth's intelligence operation, about Ambassador Taijin's communications, about how his engagement had been seen by some as an opportunity for espionage rather than genuine alliance. "I did not know about any of this," Minho said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I was not part of these plans. But they are my people, and I cannot stand here and speak about honor while hiding their dishonor, even if it costs me everything." Thyran rose from his seat, his voice thundering through the chamber. "You see, Your Majesty? This is what happens when we trust outsiders. The humans came here with deception in their hearts. This engagement was a trap from the beginning." "I said I did not know," Minho interrupted, meeting Thyran's furious gaze. "And if it was a trap, I am the one most trapped by it. I came here to help establish peaceful contact. I held a crying baby because I could not stand to hear him in pain. Everything that happened after that was not some elaborate plan. It was just life happening in unexpected ways. And now you expect us to believe you?" Thyran demanded. "You admit your people are spies, and we should still trust you." "No," Minho said. "I expect you to judge me by my actions, not by what people I have never met decided to do. I have passed 2 of your trials. I solved your puzzle in a way no one has done before. I faced your beast and chose mercy over violence. And now I am standing here, ending my own engagement and probably destroying any chance of alliance, because I would rather tell the truth than build something on lies." He turned to face Viola directly. "Your Majesty, you wanted someone in your court who did not have political agendas or secret plans. Someone you could trust. I am trying to be that person, even though it means admitting that my own government does not deserve trust right now." Vela's expression was unreadable. She sat very still on her throne, Keller sleeping peacefully in her arms. The baby was oblivious to the drama unfolding around him, and Minho felt a pang in his chest. He had grown to love that little alien infant. Walking away would hurt more than he wanted to admit. "The trial of heart requires understanding of Thyran values," Vela said finally, her voice cool and formal. "What do you believe those values are, Minho?" He took a breath. "Strength, but not just physical strength. The strength to make hard choices. Honor, but real honor that comes from your actions, not just your words. Loyalty to family and empire. Protection of those who cannot protect themselves. And," he paused, "facing the truth even when it is painful or inconvenient. And you believe you have demonstrated these values?" Vela asked. I have tried, Minho said. Maybe not in the way you expected. Maybe not in the traditional way. But yes, I have tried. Elder Vorath stood, his ancient face thoughtful. You have placed us in a difficult position. The intelligence operation you revealed is an act of war by some definitions. It demands response, perhaps even requires us to expel all humans from our space. I understand, Minho said. But punishing the colony ship and the innocent people on it for what Earth's government planned seems unfair. Most of them did not know either. What would you have us do? Vorath asked. Separate the issues, Minho said. Deal with Earth's government as you see fit. But judge the colony and judge me by our actual actions. We came here seeking allies. I agreed to an impossible engagement because I wanted to help. Those things are real, whatever else Earth was planning. The council erupted into debate. Arguments flew back and forth in Thyron, too fast and complex for Minho to follow with his limited language skills. He stood there, waiting, watching Vila for any hint of what she was thinking. But her face remained carefully neutral. Finally, Vela stood, and the chamber fell silent. I will make my judgment, she said, as is my right as queen. She handed Keller to a servant and descended from her throne. She walked toward Minho, and he could not read her expression. When she was standing directly in front of him, she spoke in a voice that carried through the entire hall. You came to my court as a stranger, she said. You calmed my son when no one else could. You accepted an engagement that terrified you because you thought it would help. You learned our language and customs and tried to adapt to our ways. You passed 2 trials using methods we never expected but could not argue were invalid. And now you stand here, knowing you will lose everything and tell the truth anyway. She paused, and Minho held his breath. These are not the actions of a spy or a deceiver, Vela continued. These are the actions of someone with genuine honor. Yes, your government planned betrayal, but you did not. You are not responsible for their choices, only your own. And your choices have been consistently selfless and brave. She turned to face the council. I have made many decisions as queen. Some good, some poor. Invoking the ancient law to engage Minho was impulsive and arguably foolish. But keeping him here, learning to trust him, seeing who he really is, that was not a mistake. Your Majesty, Thyron began, but Vela cut him off with a gesture. I am not finished. The engagement will continue. The trial of heart is past. But there will be conditions. First, Ambassador Taijin and any other Earth government officials involved in the intelligence operation will be expelled from Thyron space immediately. Second, any alliance with Earth will be suspended until their government can prove it acts in good faith. She looked at Minho. Third, the human colony ship will be granted independent status. They will not represent Earth's government but will be free to establish their own relationship with the Thyron Empire. And fourth, Minho will serve as the official liaison between the colony and our empire, with the rank and authority to negotiate on their behalf. You are giving him power, Thyron said, his tone making it clear what he thought of that idea. I am giving him responsibility, Vela corrected. The same responsibility I carry every day. The weight of choices that affect thousands of lives. If he can handle caring for my son and passing 3 impossible trials, he can handle this. She turned back to Minho. Unless you want to refuse? Walk away now, go back to your ship. Pretend none of this happened? Minho looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the young queen who had been forced to rule too soon, who made impulsive decisions out of desperation, who was trying her best to be strong for everyone around her. He saw someone who needed an ally as much as he did. And he looked at Keller, sleeping peacefully in the servant's arms. The baby who smiled when he saw Minho coming. The tiny alien prince who had somehow stolen a piece of his heart. I am not going anywhere, Minho said. This is insane and complicated, and probably going to be the hardest thing I have ever done. But I am staying. Vela smiled then, really smiled, and Minho saw warmth in her eyes that he had not seen before. Then we have much work to do. Starting with expelling your former ambassador and figuring out how to turn a colony ship full of confused humans into an independent settlement. The council continued to argue about details and logistics, but the decision was made. Minho had passed the trials. The engagement would continue. And somehow, impossibly, this bizarre situation was going to become his actual life. Days later, after Ambassador Taijin had been escorted to the border with a formal denouncement from the Thyran Empire, Minho met with the colony ship's leadership. They were confused, angry, and scared. They had left Earth expecting to establish a small outpost under Earth's protection. Now, they were being told they were independent, with only a xenobiologist turned royal consort to represent them. You cannot expect us to just accept this, said Doyen, the colony's chief administrator. We have families, children, people who depend on Earth for supplies and support. Earth used us, Minho said bluntly. They turned our diplomatic mission into a spy operation without telling us. The Thyrans have every right to expel all of us. Instead, Queen Vela is offering protection and trade rights if we establish independence. And what does she get? Asked Jiwan, the colony's security chief. What does the Thyran Empire gain? A bridge to humanity that is not poisoned by Earth's politics, Minho said. A chance to show they can work with other species peacefully. And he hesitated. They get me. As a guarantee of good faith. You are marrying their queen, Yunji said quietly. She had become his closest advisor, helping him navigate both Thyran politics and human concerns. You are betting your entire life on this working. Yes, Minho agreed. And I am asking you to trust that bet. I have seen how the Thyrans operate. They value honor and direct dealing. If we prove ourselves trustworthy, they will be powerful allies. If we try to manipulate them like Earth did, they will crush us. The negotiations took weeks. But eventually, the colony agreed to independent status. They would establish a settlement on a habitable moon in Terran space, with trade agreements and protection from the Empire. In return, they would serve as a neutral meeting point for any future human-Thyran relations. Minho split his time between the colony and the Thyran flagship. He learned to navigate both worlds, translating not just language but culture and understanding. When the colonists were frustrated by Thyran formality, he explained the importance of ritual and hierarchy. When the Thyrans were calm,